Alrighty, there we go. And just to mention that if you're not familiar with Zoom, up on the top right-hand side, you've got that view option. You can choose how you want to view the session. So you can select speaker, gallery, immersive, different options there based on what works for you. So feel free to pick your own adventure there. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Danielle Friday, and I am part of the community conservation team at Taronga Conservation Society Australia and co-founder of the Hatch Taronga Accelerator Program. So the Hatch program exists to inspire, support and launch innovative ideas to help address some of the most pressing environmental and conservation challenges currently facing our planet. And at the end of today's session, I will share some information about our upcoming programs. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So today I join you from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I also want to recognise the lands of the Camaragal people and the Wiradjuri people, which is the two lands on which Taronga and Taronga Western Plains zoos stand. I acknowledge the traditional custodians on these lands and of the lands from which you're all joining us today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Couple of quick housekeeping items for those who have just come in. I've mentioned we'd love you to keep your cameras on so we can see your lovely faces if you're happy to do so, but just keep your microphones on mute, and that we are recording today, as I mentioned before. We will have a few minutes at the end for questions. So if you do have a question for the panel, please put it in the chat as we go through and we'll get to those. So as today's session title suggests, it's all about the opportunities of ecopreneurship, and particularly for those people who might have that background in the environmental space. For those who may not be familiar with the term ecopreneurship, it's where the principles of entrepreneurship are applied to create businesses that solve environmental problems. And I'm really excited for our chat today with our conservation leaders about their journeys and how innovation can support wildlife. So let's meet them and get into it. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Nick Boyle. He's Director of Welfare, Conservation and Science at Taronga Conservation Society Australia. Nick has 20 years experience in the zoo and aquarium industry, and during this time has undertaken a range of roles, including zookeeper, precinct manager, manager of conservation and health and welfare, and also the acting director of Taronga Western Plains Zoo. In his current role, Nick leads the Welfare, Conservation and Science Division and has oversight for Taronga conservation programs and partnerships, science and research, our wildlife hospitals, nutrition of the animals, and also the animal population and welfare team. So we've got a fair bit on his plate. Nick has a background in law, biological sciences and communication, and is involved with a number of animal management groups, including the Zoo and Aquarium Association Animal Management Committee. Thanks so much, Nick, for making the time to join us today. We're also joined by Camille Goldstone-Henry, who is CEO and founder of Xylo Systems Australia. Camille is a scientist, Kamilaroi woman, and CEO and founder of this biodiversity tech startup. She's been lucky enough to work with endangered species around the world in her wildlife conservation career, including Tassie devils and Sumatran tigers. Now, Camille founded Xylo Systems in 2020. It's a cloud-based platform using artificial intelligence to connect, track and manage conservation projects so that we can tackle the extinction crisis faster together. And Camille was a participant in our Hatch program last year. Xylo Systems is already an award-winning startup, and Camille's been awarded honours including the Women's Weekly Women of the Future Award in 2021, this year's New South Wales Woman of the Year finalist, and also winner of 2 Women in AI awards this year for her passion in bringing together wildlife and technology to help turbocharge wildlife conservation and preserve biodiversity for future generations. Great to have you here, Camille. And our third panellist today is Charlotte Mills, Head of Ecology at AirSeed. Charlotte is a community ecologist by training, and as I mentioned, the head of ecology at the AirSeed startup, where she's responsible for product development and project delivery. She completed her PhD in desert ecology in 2019 and has published 11 scientific publications. Charlotte's experience ranges across a number of environmental industries, and she has almost 10 years experience designing and delivering ecological projects from the desert through to the tropics. And now working at a startup, Charlotte is rapidly learning about the world of business while getting to apply her technical skills to the real world. And she's thoroughly enjoying it, which we look forward to hearing more about. So thanks for being here, Charlotte. So really appreciate you all making the time to talk with us, and let's get into some questions because it's all about hearing from you. So love to start with each of you sharing just a little bit more about yourself and your career journey to date. Nick, we might start with you for that one.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I suppose I'll start at the beginning. I grew up in northwestern New South Wales, and from a young age, I had a passion for wildlife and particularly marine life from a very early age. And that's probably strange growing up so far from the coast. But I sort of continued on that pathway for a while as a young kid and maintained that interest, and actually studied science communications at University of New South Wales and did a bit of a major in marine biology. And as Danielle mentioned before, I went on to do law after that. And it's sort of those sliding door moments, I think, that kind of see you head in one direction and not another. For me, I was working as in security as a bouncer in King's Cross, and one of my colleagues at university said, "Oh, look, you seem to be falling asleep in class. I think I could get you a job at Sydney Aquarium if you like." And so I started at Sydney Aquarium on the touch pool over there, telling kids not to pick up starfish, and then that's where I sort of started in the zoo and aquarium industry. So yeah, I've been at Taronga for about 15 years now. Danielle mentioned quite a few of the roles before. I've had about 14 different roles in that time, and across things like animal training, life support systems, small population management, and had a wonderful stint as the director out at Taronga Western Plains Zoo that took me out of my comfort zones of science and caring for animals, and into things like, running accommodation and food and beverage and things like that out there, as well as the animals. So yeah, that's sort of been my pathway, and it's a bit more of a spider web more than a career tree. But yeah, it's been wonderful, and I've had lots of really good opportunities to head overseas and work with other zoos and at different UN conferences and delegations and things like that. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Thanks so much, Nick. And I've worked with you for 4.5 years now, and I did not know about the bouncer background. So you learn something new every day. Awesome. Might head over to you, Camille, now. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey.
Sure. I think like Nick and everyone else on this call, I have always had a passion for wildlife, and it's all I ever wanted to do. I grew up in Newcastle, New South Wales. I'm in Sydney now, but just 2 hours up north, and spent a lot of time, on the beach and bushwalking and nature, and that just really solidified my career path for me. So when I finished school, I went off to university at the University of Sydney to study animal and veterinary bioscience. And I think that was kind of one of the crossroads for me, wondering whether to go into veterinary science or down the animal and vet bioscience path. And I decided the bioscience path because I realized the career opportunities for heading into wildlife, and specifically wildlife conservation, were much more vast than the veterinary pathway. Not to say that you can't get here through the vet pathway, it's just a little bit more competitive. And through that, I took on an honours project in my final year with the Zoo and Aquarium Association. So I looked at the Greater Bilby Breed for Release program that's been running for a number of years now, and Taronga is heavily involved in that. And in that project, I had to take like 30 years worth of physical paper documentations and put it into an Excel spreadsheet. And, this was like 2013. I'm like, there has to be a better way of doing this. Anyway, so that took me down the path of, I landed a job at the Zoo and Aquarium Association as a species management officer, and then worked up to conservation manager a few years later. So I worked on conservation projects collaboratively with the Zoo and Aquarium Association, Zoo and Aquarium industry, with governments, other wildlife conservation, not-for-profits, community groups, landholders across Australia and around the world. So I was very lucky that I got a lot of exposure. But it was also during this time I started to see a lot of gaps in how we share information, how we track where different conservation projects are up to. It was really hard to know who was doing what. And so that became my pet peeve. And I decided that was the problem that I was going to solve, because that was really holding us back in this space where we already don't have enough time and we already don't have enough money. So if we can share information and make more strategic decisions, perhaps we can deploy our limited resources a little bit better. So I decided to step out of conservation for a few years, because I recognized that I didn't have skills outside of conservation, skills outside of, the very science academic space. I wanted to build up my skills in business and project management. So I took up a role at the University of Sydney, and I also enrolled myself in an MBA at UNSW. So that was really the path that led me down entrepreneurship. And in 2020, I founded Xylo Systems and went into some incubators, and then last year ended up at the Hatch program. So that's kind of been my journey. It's been a little bit of shifting, but I've landed myself here, and I'm really happy I took the risk in jumping into starting my own startup.
Yeah, thank you so much, Camille. And it's been wonderful getting to know you and work with you last year and ongoing, and see Xylo go from strength to strength. And I love that you talked about identifying that pain point or that problem that needed solving, because that so often is the starting point for ecopreneurship or entrepreneurship in general. So I'm sure we can learn a bit more about that as we go through today's chat. And Charlotte, we'd love to hear a little bit more from you.
Thanks, Danielle, and it's great to be on a panel with you, Camille and Nick. So I guess, to repeat similar veins from Camille and Nick, something I've always been conscious of is that I've been hyper aware of the role of humans and the role they play in looking after, but also just being part of nature and the earth. So that's what's always sort of guided me in my career decisions. I grew up in Wagga, and some of my first pieces of writing are about rubbish at Wagga Beach, which is not a real beach, but apparently one of the top 10 beaches in Australia, according to the sign there at the moment. So there you go. But I went from Wagga straight to Sydney and did an environmental science degree and an arts degree. So from the start, I've always been a bit of a jack of all trades. I've had my finger in lots of different pies. I would run sustainability volunteer programs at uni, and I try to identify how humans fit into that nature space. So then I was driven by a sense of adventure, I guess. So after I finished my degree and my honours year, where I did research up in Mile Lakes, lots of field ecology stuff, I went out to semi-arid and arid zones, and I reintroduced quolls in the Flinders Ranges, and I counted trees in Western New South Wales. And then I was still driven by wanting to have an adventure for another few years. So I actually chose my PhD program in desert ecology so that I could just be out in the desert a bit more, really. It's just a stunning place to be and quite inspirational when you're out there. So I've got a heavy field ecology background. And then COVID came along after I finished my PhD, and I secured this really neat postdoc that was full of adventure in tropical forests in Panama, and was unable to do any of that. So that gave me a lot of time to think about what I would do and what my priorities were, and redefine the term adventure, I guess, a little bit in my head. And that's how I've ended up at AirSeed Tech, where I get really excited about developing some of the biotech that we use to deliver seeds from drones. And also I get to delve into the world of project management, which I started developing the skills for in my PhD, but it's a lot more collaborative now. But we can talk more about that in the next bits, if you like.
Amazing. Thanks, Charlotte. And yeah, I love that phrase you used there about redefining the term adventure. And so often great opportunities do pop up, I guess a bit like Nick said as well, one of those moments where which way do you go and what opportunities present, and you just never know where it will take you. So awesome. So obviously today we are keen to explore that idea around people with this environmental background and taking those opportunities to apply that to the startup world. And so Camille and Charlotte, as you've just both described, you are great examples of this. We've talked a little bit about what inspired you, and I sat behind that, but how did you actually go about making that change? So Camille, I might come to you first.
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, I had the problem kicking around in my mind for quite some time, quite a few years. I knew that there was this issue of connectivity, information sharing in the conservation community that I wanted to overcome. There was also the problem of how do we show that we're having impact towards species recovery, not just at, you know, the organization, state, or national level, but also at the international level, and achieving things like the Aichi biodiversity targets. And we can do all of that through data, but exactly how I got there is, yeah, it's a funny story in that I've always had this idea in my mind, and a colleague of mine sent me in 2020 a link to an incubator program for wildlife and biodiversity focused startups. And that actually allowed me to take the idea from an idea and put it into a business model and start to understand how you can take these ideas in environment and really develop a startup. So that was the beginning for me. At the same time, I'd also enrolled myself in an MBA, and I'm not saying you have to enroll yourself in an MBA to achieve developing a startup or to implement your idea. It's just been really helpful for me, I guess, in my career goals, and has really helped me along the startup journey. So developing those business skills, having that scientific backing, and then going through this incubator program really was the starting seeds of Xylo Systems. And then the Hatch Accelerator just helped us accelerate that even further last year. So yeah, that was really the beginnings of how I shifted into the startup space. And even this year, I've been able to quit my job because I was doing this on the side for about 2 years as a side hustle. And in February this year, I took the risk and decided to launch myself full-time into Xylo Systems. And this is where I've seen the most growth. So there's a lot of risk, a lot of backing yourself, but you know, you need to back yourself in this space.
100%. And, you know, it is really exciting to see that there are more of these programs popping up to support these type of initiatives, obviously Hatch being one of them, but there's a lot out there. And yeah, it's exciting to see that opportunity because like Camille, you know, there's so many great ideas floating around out there, but how do we actually bring those to fruition and to drive that impact? So Charlotte, how about you? Like any particular insights on how you actually made that transition?
Yeah, I guess for a lot of people, if from an academic background, it can be a difficult proposition because it feels like you're locked out of the entire academic industry. But for me, it was a lot of realizations about what I needed in my work life, and in related how that work life was going to build on the things that I care about, which are conservation. And I'm also very interested in how we can build an economy around conservation. So the externalizing the internalities of what all the issues with conservation and restoration. These things are expensive, but they've got such broad effects on human well-being. So the things that I identified that I needed, well, for one thing, academia, which I was working in at the time, has a very individualized working system. And I've seen someone describe it recently as like all these different labs are like little startups on their own, but they've got this like this higher up bureaucracy they're working under. But those startups are very individual. I wanted something that was much more collaborative in my work life and much more applied. So I was looking for opportunities in this space, knowing the criteria that I had for myself and knowing that I wanted a little bit more stability that I was being offered at the time, and that I was flexible in location, but that I just wanted that I wanted to expand my business knowledge as well, but on the ground in a business itself by being involved in running it. So yeah. I was the 6th hire at AirSeed, which means that, and the 1st hire in the Ecology department. So it means I've got a really good opportunity here. It was a really attractive opportunity because I can help build my role and build the company as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really interesting what you talk about there, being clear on what you want, what your values are, what's important to you, because that everyone, it's something that's valuable for everyone to do at many stages throughout their career, and then being able to find that opportunity. And I also agree with you that I think that intersection of business and environment and conservation and how we blend the two together is such an important focus for creating that better future than I guess where we've got to at this point. So it's great to see people with that environmental expertise being part of that, rather than I guess leaving it all to the tech experts or the traditional I guess business leaders who don't have that appreciation of the complexity and value of the natural environment. So Nick, keen from your perspective now, obviously, through your experience from the conservation space, any thoughts around particular opportunities for eco startups or like other eco startups you've come across that are having a positive impact at this point?
Yeah, well, in terms of opportunities, the one opportunity is there's no shortage of problems that need to be tackled. I think whether you're talking about invasive species or habitat fragmentation, pollution, the pressures exerted by climate change, exploitation of species, these are all the wicked problems that our environment, our wildlife faces. And I think one opportunity is an emerging focus on biodiversity in the corporate world. The World Economic Forum not so long ago calculated the benefits that we derive from nature at about 125 trillion US every year. And the post-2020 framework that the Convention of Biological Diversity are putting out, that will ask all the signatory countries to ratify. One of the targets in there calls for all businesses to understand and reduce their biodiversity footprint. It's a bit different to carbon accounting. There's not going to be a one size fits all or a really neat way to account for that. I think there's a real opportunity there, though, in supporting a particular sector of the corporate world to really accurately account for and manage their impact on biodiversity, including maximising the positive benefits that industry or that corporation may have. So I think that's a real opportunity. In terms of others that are doing well, I'm always inspired by the ones that I've come across through the Hatch program, obviously Xylo, but I won't steal any of Camille's thunder. Good Eddie and Carapac. One other one outside of that, I think, and they mightn't so much describe themselves as a startup, but a real innovation to tackle a problem with real world application that I thought I might mention is the problem being feral cats. And every year we know feral cats kill, around about 1.5 billion native Australian animals every year. That's a lot. And we're probably never going to completely get on top of it, but in some of those important areas where there might be animals being reintroduced or really precious populations, there's a group called Ecological Horizons who came out with the Felixa grooming traps. And I suppose it's a bit of a tricky one to talk about. Not everyone's comfortable with the idea of culling feral species, but this is a really innovative way that they've come up with a method of feral cat control that takes advantage of the specific behaviours of the cats and the morphology of the cat, so that the lasers detect that the thing walking in front of the trap is actually a cat and not something else, and then shoots a little paintball of poison. And because the cats groom and a lot of the other species don't groom as much, it really does target that species. And then they've worked with FAME and the Ian Potter grants, and I think it's Appledine engineers to really optimize those earlier prototypes. So that's probably one in the real world of conservation application that we're quite familiar with through some of our rewilding national parks like Sturt National Park and the Bilby program that we've been involved in out there with that team.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Nick. And I think a couple of points that you've raised there, absolutely, that the increased focus on biodiversity, I think, is amazing. And if anyone's seen the McCarthy wave diagram, it's sort of the first wave we're more immediately being concerned with over the last couple of years is obviously COVID. And then, the next wave is recession. The next wave is climate change, which is obviously very important and closely interlinked with what we're talking about with biodiversity. But that the biggest wave threat of all is biodiversity collapse. And it's only starting to get a bit of recognition in the more mainstream world. So it's good to see and exciting, as you say, the opportunities to help drive that for, you know, in a positive way. But also, you know, you touched there on, you know, those opportunities for collaboration across different expertise. And Charlotte, you know, you mentioned that as well around, you know, the opportunity to, you know, work more closely with other people of different skills and backgrounds. And, you know, that's certainly something that through the Hatch program, we, you know, are really supportive of and trying to drive, because we know that people from so many different backgrounds can come together and come up with some amazing solutions. So in terms of, I'd love to, I guess, come back to Camille and Charlotte now. Whenever we undertake new opportunities or, you know, new undertakings, there's some challenges that come along with that. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about some of the key challenges that you might have faced so far. Charlotte, I might start with you this time.
Yeah, so while I sought out very specific things about this job, for my job, that didn't mean I was necessarily prepared for them. So things like teamwork and the level of communication that's required, and these are very specific challenges, but they're very front of my mind at the moment. Communication that's required to work across a multidisciplinary team is next level to anything I've seen in my work life before. And it's been really exciting to know that there's room to grow there, but also having to work through the challenge every time I realize that I'm falling short of where it needs to be is it's a challenge. And then working in the tech industry, constantly iterating the same thing and having to have good enough at every stage has been a really interesting challenge to be exposed to. So you're constantly trying to improve on what you've got, but you're also trying to meet short-term deadlines that that will help you get to the next stage. So that's been interesting and has been a very different approach to working from what I've done before. And then generally just switching my brain from a research world to a commercial world where there are things that I can't tell clients about because they're commercial confidence items. And I like talking a lot, and I've never been good at keeping secrets. So I'm learning a lot about those things as well.
Thank you. It's really valuable insights. And I think, you know, I'm sure you're not alone in some of those challenges, but I also think it's interesting that point you make around that commercial confidence piece and finding that balance, because I also think it's so important that we do have cross collaboration. And I know that's obviously something that drives Xylo with Camille's work, to, I guess, make the most of the resources and get the best outcomes as well. So it's a hard balance to find. Camille, I'll head over to you now. I'd love to hear, you know, maybe some key challenges and learnings you've had.
I think on Charlotte's point around testing and iterating a technical product, because we are a tech platform, has definitely been a challenge. I'm obviously the domain expert in Xylo Systems. I've got the background in conservation, and I've got some training in data and data science, and can to some extent build a platform with very low code or no code tools. But obviously having that tech expertise has been key and will be key continuing in driving Xylo Systems forward, expanding out the actual platform and scaling it out to many organizations. And actually finding tech talent has been really hard. So that would be the first challenge I would share with everyone, is that although we're all coming from, you know, the eco expert backgrounds, a lot of the innovation and startup world, and particularly the most impactful ones, are tech products or tech startups. It's never too early to start looking for your tech partner if you're not technically educated, or I wouldn't say I'm technically challenged, but like I can't code, for example. So that's been a bit of a challenge, but I now have the expertise around me to address those gaps. And that is key in a startup, is if you don't have the technical expertise, find people who can. So I've actually just brought on a co-founder. Her name's Jada, and she's got experience in building these types of tech products, and specifically tech management. And I've also got an advisory board that fills those technical skill gaps. So that has been a big challenge. The other challenge has been accessing the right expertise at the right time. You're building a startup, you're not an expert, usually you're not an expert in like accounting or legal or marketing. And they are all key to getting a startup off the ground and growing a startup. So that is a challenge. And that's where accelerators like Hatch come in so handy, because they directly link you to like the best in the field, particularly when you need it. So really do consider getting into an accelerator or incubator.
Yeah, thanks, Camille. I think it's fair to say that most people, certainly in this space, don't get into ecopreneurship because they're passionate about accounting or, you know, some of the, I guess, the business management side of it, and some of the learning that has to come with it. And yeah, that's certainly one of the things we try to help with is providing some guidance and structure there to make it as, I guess, painless as possible. So actually, while we're just talking on that, I'll quickly divert. Shana put a question around some of the other accelerators and incubator programs being mentioned other than Hatch. So Camille, did you wanted to talk about the ones you've done?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot out there, and there are some specifically in the environment and wildlife space. So the first one I did was called the Wild Idea Incubator. And this is run by a conservation organisation called Odonata in partnership with the New South Wales government and NAB Bank. And so this is for like, you know, you have an idea, very early stage startups. There's a lot connected to universities. So I'm currently going through the University of Sydney Genesis program, which is for kind of more advanced startups. There's UNSW Founders Program if you're connected to UNSW. There's one at UTS. Not sure if there's one at Macquarie University because I don't have any connections there, but I'm sure there is. And there's a lot of other programs connected to startup hubs in the city. So there's Tank Stream Labs that run incubator programs. Fishburners is a tech startup hub that runs incubator programs. So if you are interested in learning more about what's out there, I recommend you jump on the Facebook page called Sydney Startups, because a lot of the startup opportunities are often posted there.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very impressive list off the top of your head. So yeah, absolutely. As you said, I know Macquarie does have one. Most universities, so even if you're outside of Sydney, you'll find an equivalent, you know, page that like Sydney Startups. I know there's one for Melbourne. Also, as Camille said, most unis will have a program. So there's lots of options out there. Hatch is also Australia-wide. So I think pre-COVID times, a lot of incubators and accelerators were very location specific, and we always wanted to be nationwide so we could connect in and attract the best initiatives from across the country. And so we're continuing that. So, you know, we really want to support people from across the country. And we've got our Idea Gen program coming up, which starts in a couple of weeks. It's fully online, free, so that you can access it, you know, from anywhere. And also it's a couple of hours a week, so you can fit it in amongst your other commitments. So, you know, we want to help people get started, a bit like Camille did, where it's on the side. It's, you know, in addition to what you're doing, as you can build and flesh out that idea and then see how you go with progressing that through the programs. All right, wonderful. And thanks, Camille, for that. We've answered that question. So we've talked a bit about some of the challenges, and obviously you talked a little bit about some of the learnings out of that. Are there any other key learnings that you would share with, you know, from this journey so far? And I might come to you, Camille.
Oh, there's so many key learnings, so many. Surround yourself with the right people has been my biggest key learning. The other one is, and it probably took me longer to do this because I was doing it as a side hustle, is getting out there and chatting to whoever your target market is to understand their problems and make sure that the solution you're proposing is actually going to address their problems. Do that as soon as you possibly can, because if you continue to build and it's not actually something that people want, you're going to waste a whole bunch of your own time and potentially money. So that has been a key learning and took me a while to learn that one. Other key lessons, a mentor said to me a couple of months ago, particularly in the startup space, you have to have a bowl of rejection every morning for breakfast. Rejection is rife in the startup community. Not everyone's going to like your idea. Not everyone's going to want to fund you. Not everyone's going to want to work with you. So be comfortable with rejection. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Great tips. Charlotte, over to you. Any other key learnings that you'd share?
Look, I think Camille's covered so much in her last couple of answers, but to echo some of her points, you will quickly find out your strengths and your weaknesses, and you need to identify how you can get help and which ones you can address yourself and where you need to pull in extra help.
I think that's a great point to reiterate, because I think often founders can feel like they should be able to do it alone and figure it out. But the reality is, it's so much better if you can, connect with others, get that help, whether that's particular expertise in an area, or whether that's just connecting with other founders who are going through a similar experience and being able to support each other. That's invaluable. So fantastic. Well, thank you. I'm going to switch back to Nick now. So Nick, Taronga is a leading conservation organisation and, a potential partner for environmental startups in the future. So what are some key considerations from your perspective for eco startups?
Yeah, I think one of the important ones is understanding the needs of your partner and what problem is it that you're trying to solve, and what will this achieve for them? Is it better outcomes in their priority areas? Is it reduced costs? Is it time saved? And really hone in on that and show the value of what your partnership will achieve for them. I think also you need to tailor your pitch to the audience that you're talking to, and with a larger organisation, that might mean you need to be able to give the elevator pitch in the executive team or with the board or whoever, but then also be prepared to get right down into the weeds with some of the subject matter experts. And I think one of the other things for both the partner organisation and the startup, I think knowing up front whether you can be flexible in your approach. You might find that the partner organisation wants to change things, tweak things, they like part of it, but don't want to sort of focus on other elements that are important to you. And I think just understanding where you can be flexible, where you can make changes, and where there's non-negotiables, because otherwise it erodes your vision too much. I think another one is making sure that your values are aligned on both sides of the ledger, and working where values are aligned. And I think within that, there's obviously an opportunity to leverage from each other's brand and each other's reputation, and that can be great. I think what works really well is once you're entering into partnerships, having upfront agreements on how you talk about each other, how you celebrate each other's work or wins, and when milestones are achieved, and having a shared understanding of how that happens before the partnership's entered into, I'd say, is important.
Thank you. Some really great points and insights there, and things you may not necessarily think about, like that. How do you promote each other and celebrate together? Sometimes you don't think about those things until it's the moment of, and always better to agree in advance. So great, thanks. Okay, so. And just a reminder for everyone, we are getting towards the end of our questions. So if you do have questions, this is the opportunity to ask the panel. So please pop those in the chat if you've got them, and we'll get to those in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to come to all of the panel members and ask, what's the top piece of advice you would give to others that are keen to either set up their own eco business or join an eco-focused startup? So I might start with you, Charlotte, on that one.
Yeah, so I can speak to joining something that's already sort of getting off the ground. My key advice is to just put yourself out there. And I think that people probably hear that a lot, but it really does just mean you can email people, and if they know that you exist and you present yourself well on that first impression, like just a nice, neat CV that's easy to read, and a nice email that's positions you well and shows why you're interested, that can get you a long way. And because startups are basically just short for time all the time. So if they can save on a hiring process, then they will. So that's a great way to just start approaching people who are of interest. And if you get into something early, it means that you're going to be doing a lot more things. You're going to be working on business and pitches, and like for me, I'm an ecologist, I'm a scientist, but I comment on the business. I do some of the social media stuff. I get interviewed for television shows, all kinds of things. but it's great. It develops you as a person, and it means that you get to really shape your role, which is a really exciting place to be.
Thank you. I think that's awesome. And absolutely, as you say, you do get to shape it and develop lots of those different skills, which I guess for many people is part of the reason they want that challenge. And it's a great development opportunity to set yourself up for success in that role, and who knows what's to come in the future. So, what about you, Nick? What's sort of your top piece of advice? I appreciate, obviously, you're coming from a slightly different perspective, but what's your thoughts around top tips there?
Yeah, I'm not brave enough to go out and do my own thing. I think tapping into something Camille said before, we hear a lot about overnight successes because they make good media stories, but I think they're few and far between. So you've got to be prepared to roll up the sleeves and stick at it, and probably understanding what it is that's going to motivate you when you feel like no progress is being made, and make sure that you maintain the rage. I think one of the other ones I was thinking, and this is sort of reflecting on some of the different pitches we've had when we're sort of refining down to the, in the accelerator program, knowing your market and understanding what's already out there and doing a bit of a SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats of your initiative compared to what's already out in the market, I think is important. And a bit of a pestle, which, I think I'm trying to get all the words here right, but the political, the environmental, the social, the technological, the legal landscape. Having a good understanding of all of that. We have seen a couple of pitches that had thought that they had a really unique idea, but there was already something out there that was almost exactly the same, possibly even a little bit better. So that was going to make it difficult for them. And then other ones that sounded like a really good idea, but when you delve into the regulatory parameters, it would have been really difficult to actually achieve where they were heading without significant shifts in legislation, which is pretty hard to influence. So I think they'd be my bits of advice.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Super valuable advice there. And, I think that is one of the challenges in this space when you just talk around, some of the need for really big systems change to be able to get some of these changes or developments through. And it's not to say we don't want to try and push hard, but it's working out where can you have the impact and use your expertise to make a difference versus, I guess, where there might be barriers that are just going to make it really complex. And so, yeah, that's, certainly something we've worked with through Hatch with some of our teams to try and determine, what are those opportunities to actually drive the impact rather than getting caught up in things well outside your control. What about you, Camille? You've offered lots of great advice already, but are there top tips you'd give for anyone in this, considering this move?
I think Nick touched on it, is that we see a lot of overnight successes in the news, but really being a startup founder, particularly in the eco space, is you have to be very, very driven, and you almost have to blindly believe in what you're doing and that it will change the world because you're going to be the driver of that. But on the flip side of that, you also have to be consistent and prepared to do the day-to-day boring work, because that's where you really do make the progress. And honestly, my days isn't sitting on fun startup panels, which is one of the funnest parts of my job that I get to do, or interacting with other founders. It's talking to my customers and finding out what pain points I can relieve for them. And this all comes again down to what Nick said about doing your research. It's really important in the eco and conservation space because a lot of the organizations you're working with are already extremely time poor. So you have to be really clear with your value proposition and understand what they're working on really, really well to be able to get cut through and to get their attention, because they've got a billion other things going on. And I mean, values are aligned, yes, but you need more than that. You need more than aligned values. You need value for them. So yeah, day-to-day boring work, your value proposition, and backing yourself 120% because you're going to get a million no's every single day.
Yeah, amazing. Fantastic tips. Thank you. So last question, and then as I say, if there's any questions from the audience, we'll put those to the panel, but I'd love to look at the future and know for Xylo and for AirSeed, what's coming up next. So Charlotte, what's happening at AirSeed that you can maybe share with us?
Well, at AirSeed, we're heading, we're at the end of our first planting season in Australia. It's awesome. It's been really good. We've learned so much about our systems, but basically we are confident that we're going to be able to provide biodiverse restoration opportunities across Australia and at large scales. It's going to be really exciting. And in the future, in the next couple of years, we'll be heading international probably.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on completing the first planting season. That's a big milestone to celebrate, and really look forward to, seeing and hearing more about the great work in the future.
Thank you.
Camille, what's happening at Xylo?
We've just finished our MVP development, which is a really big tech development milestone for us. And it means that we now have actual functioning software and not just prototypes. So yeah, we finished that about a week and a half ago. So we've had a bit of a celebration in our team, which is so exciting. And we're working with a few different organizations to test the platform out, test the software and make sure it works for their needs. So we're working with the team at Taronga on the Norfolk Island Snail project, which is pretty cool. But next we're looking out towards, because one of the gaps we've realized is that a lot of the hardware to collect conservation data is quite expensive, particularly real-time data. So we're looking at entering into potentially some hardware and developing some, much over my technical head, but some node networks where you can set up, kind of nodes across remote locations and real-time stream data back to you, whether that's, temperature or humidity or, what animals are in that landscape. So that's a really exciting pursuit for us that we've just started looking into recently. And we've got a partnership with another startup down in Tassie offering that hardware service. So that's going to help us scale out really quickly. We're testing with a few specific species at the moment, but next stage is to kind of expand out to the top 100 priority species that have been listed under the Threatened Species Program. And then we're looking to launch Australia-wide in the next few months. I'm hoping by June, but that depends how these tests go with our current partners. And then global, maybe next year. We'll see how it goes.
I love it. Dream big. Congratulations, on getting that MVP sorted, because I know how much work has gone into that. And yeah, really excited to see it all come to life and in action. So look, thank you all so much for joining us and being part of this conversation and so openly, sharing your experiences and tips today. It's fantastic. And I just want to briefly talk a little bit about the hatch programs that are coming up in case anyone's interested. Haven't got any more questions yet, but if you do have a question, please feel free to pop it in the chat. But in the meantime, I'm just going to share my screen and just show and just talk through a little bit about what we've got happening. So I mentioned we've got our idea generation program happening that starts on the 19th of May. This is running for 6 weeks, free and online for 2 hours a week on a Thursday lunchtime. And it's really wanting, the design is for anyone who is passionate in this space, whether you come from an environmental background or not, and you're keen to start developing some ideas, or maybe you have an early stage idea, but you just don't really know where to go next or want some support to flesh that out. So we'll be talking about some conservation challenges, looking at design thinking, systems thinking, and also helping you prepare your first pitch at the end of that program. So looking forward to working with lots of great future ecopreneurs in that space. Then later this year, we'll be running our pre-accelerator. Again, that'll be free and online in a 6-week program. And the purpose there is really to help set those foundations right for somebody wanting to start up to turn their idea into an actual venture. So helping you get really clear on that impact-led business, your value proposition, social business canvas, and also prepare for a first round of market testing with your idea. As we've heard today, that's obviously a key part of making sure you're getting this right and you've got something to share with the market. And then in 2023, we will run our next round of the Hatch Accelerator, which is a 14-week blended program. And fingers crossed, if COVID behaves itself, we can actually do it with some time on site at Taronga as well as online. And this is a program that Camille's been through. We've got $50,000 for the winning team. But most importantly, we really want to make sure that we're supporting all of the teams that come through there to progress and get their initiatives up to drive positive impact. So if you are interested, love to have you join us. All the information is on the website, and I'll just reshare the links there. So you've got the links to the Hatch program, also to Xylo Systems and AirSeed, so you can connect with these amazing ladies, learn more about it, what they're doing, and also information, the link there to information around the great work that the Taronga Conservation team is doing. So that's it from us for now. Looks like they're all letting you off easy, panel. I haven't seen any other questions pop in. So if you do have any questions, as I say, please do feel free to pop those in. Otherwise, we'll let everybody head off and get on with the rest of their Thursday. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Camille, Charlotte, Nick, really appreciate it. And we look forward to getting to connect with you again soon. Thanks, everyone.